to have chips made in this country. Right now, everything's made in Taiwan practically, almost all of it, a little bit in South Korea, but everything, almost all of it is made in Taiwan. And we want it to be made. We want those companies to come to our country in all due respect. You know, they took the business away. Taiwan took our chip business away. We had Intel, we had these great companies that did so well, and it was taken from us, and we want that business back. We want it back in the United States. And if they don't bring it back, we're not going to be very happy.
Sir, on tariffs.
2019年末爆发的全球新冠肺炎疫情，一度按下了全球交流的暂停键，在各国纷纷关闭国门的同时，世人习以为常的货畅其流，随着之后严峻的疫情变化，成为一种奢望。但是很快的，这个世界又因为一个晶片连在一起，然后又因为晶片短缺的问题，全世界都认识了台湾跟台积电。
The COVID-19 pandemic turned a global shortage of chips into a crisis. At the start of the pandemic, many industries pulled back their chip orders in anticipation of what was expected to be a significant blow to economies around the world. But when lockdowns called for people to stay at home, online ordering skyrocketed. People purchased computers for their home offices, fitness electronics to keep active, and gaming devices to be entertained. The pandemic accelerated the pace of digitalization. Once industries realized the demand for electronics had only stalled temporarily and was now accelerating, they had one tiny problem. There weren't enough chips for new orders.
The semiconductor industry is truly the engine room of the global economy. Chips go into everything from your smartphone to your car to massive data centers. And the web of global connections is enormous. ASML in the Netherlands producing the lithography machines that are shipped to TSMC here in Taiwan that manufactures the actual chips using designs from ARM in the UK, NVIDIA and Apple. China, the biggest consumer of semiconductors on the planet.
Now the semiconductor industry is massive. Within the industry, there are semiconductor companies that design the chips, called fabless companies, and there are companies that manufacture them, called foundries. There are also integrated device manufacturers like Intel that both design and manufacture chips. More and more, though, major semiconductor companies are adopting the fabless model and contracting out orders to foundries like Taiwan Semiconductor or Samsung. And that trend toward fabless has helped complicate the chip shortage we've all been hearing about. The US chip industry has captured 47% of the global market share in sales, but only 12% in chip manufacturing, according to the Semiconductor Industry Association.
It's no secret that the electronics manufacturing is kind of based in China, right? But what people kind of don't know is that the number one pure chip factory in the world is in Taiwan. That's TSMC. Now, Taiwan's an ally. Taiwan has not had the trade issues that China has, but it's still an island.
无论各国是基于什么原因，对晶片产生了巨大的渴望，如今拥有可生产晶片的半导体工厂，变成世界各国争相竞逐的目标。根据国际半导体产业协会 SEMI 在2025年1月公布的全球晶圆厂预测报告指出，2025年全球将有18座新的晶圆厂起建，其中北美和日本各有4座新厂，计划领先其他地区。中国和欧洲及中东地区则以3座厂房并列第3，台湾则以2座，韩国和东南亚各1座在其之后。在 SEMI 的预估报告里，2025年半导体的产能将增加 6.6%， 达到每个月3360万片晶圆的规模。同时，因应运算需求的不断增长，7奈米以下的先进制程产能将会来到月产220万片。至于8奈米到45奈米的主流制程 ，SEMI 预期在中国晶片自给自足的策略以及汽车和物联网应用的带动下，2025年月产能将可突破1500万片的规模。而根据德勤在近期发表的研究报告来看，他们预估2025年全球半导体的销售额可望达到6970亿美元，这是一个非常巨大的市场规模。
This is NVIDIA's H100 chip. It takes thousands of them to train just one AI model. and each chip is worth more than $25,000. Almost all of the world's supply comes from one small island, Taiwan, and the vast majority are made by only one chipmaker, TSMC. It's arguably one of the most important companies in the world, so any disruption to its operations could affect the global economy. A recent earthquake briefly stopped production, prompting a number of questions about what a prolonged shutdown could do to the world's supply of chips. Its geography poses a more complicated problem than earthquakes, though. TSMC has 15 factories in Taiwan, mostly clustered along its west coast, less than 100 miles from China, and that makes the US very uncomfortable.
India wants to be a semiconductor powerhouse. By 2029, India wants to be among the world's top 5 chip producers. The top 5 in the next 5 years, because global supply chains are being remade and India is in a unique position to capitalize. The United States agrees with this assessment. Today, it welcomed India into a new chip partnership. For starters, American investment to build India's semiconductor ecosystem. The Americans are expected to focus on 2 areas. The first is semiconductor assembly, where India puts together the various pieces, testing the final chip and then shipping it to the rest of the world. So that's the first focus area, chip assembly. The second area is training, sharing technological know-how with Indian engineers. Now, these are the 2 things that the US wants to work on, chip assembly and sharing technology. The actual investment may take some time to materialize. They will start with some assessments, basically to evaluate India's current chip ecosystem. Where do we stand? To identify the gaps.
While Taiwan leads the world in the production of advanced semiconductors, Japan is gaining momentum, outspending the United States and Germany on chip subsidies in terms of GDP. Japan is going all in on semiconductors, making a $67 billion bet to once again become a global chip powerhouse. Japan wants to revive its semiconductor glory days of the 1980s, and it's mobilizing everyone. The government, the private sector, academia, even international partners like TSMC and IBM. That means billions in investments and billions more in subsidies. And the stakes are high. Advanced chips will serve as the foundation for a dozen critical technologies, including artificial intelligence, weapon systems, and electric vehicles. Devices like smartphones and gaming consoles are all powered by semiconductors. Tiny silicon chips, smaller than a fingernail, which often take weeks, even months, to be fabricated. The semiconductor market is projected to be worth $1 trillion by 2030.
Given the challenges that Intel is clearly having, when you look at the grant program, if you will, do you think that a decade from now, we're going to look back and say, this was great, we did it perfectly, we're not even perfectly, we did this well, we're happy we did this? Or do you think we're going to look back, like I think a lot of people look now at even some of the EV efforts or EV charging efforts that didn't appear to work the way they were supposed to?
I think perfect is a pretty high bar. I think if the question is, will the CHIPS Act have spurred a major investment boom in chip manufacturing in the United States? The answer is already pretty clear. It's yes. There's been something like a 10x increase over the past couple of years in investment in chip fabs relative to the trend over the prior decade. TSMC, for example, already has a plant up and running in Arizona with the manufacturing quality, the company says, matching what it can do in Taiwan. And we've got big projects underway with other companies as well. I think, you can't see with a crystal ball any specific company's plan, and that's why the government's making a broad array of bets.
Now chairman of TSMC Arizona, Rick Cassidy has been with the company 27 years.
And how close are we to full production in this building?
Very close.
But according to TSMC's initial timeline, full production should already be happening.
Getting the right talent, and of course doing so during a pandemic when there was shortages, you couldn't build a house, let alone build a chip foundry.
It gives you some idea for what is required to build massive scale in this industry. It's not a game for sissies. It's hard and it's expensive.
The fab is filled with billions of dollars of machinery operating at the very edge of what's scientifically possible. like these bus-sized EUV machines made by a single company, ASML, the only machines in the world able to perform the extreme ultraviolet lithography necessary for etching minuscule designs on the most advanced chips.
So these are $250 million tools. In order to hook one up requires something over 2,000 electrical connections, over 2 kilometers of cabling, 100,000 parts, 40,000 bolts. We're talking about massive. So learning how to overcome that challenge was something that was good for TSMC, good for the trades, good for Phoenix, good for the US.
对许多国家来说，他们或许把台积电跟三星当成专做独门生意、把持高端技术的垄断者。但是，如果你愿意花更多时间去理解跟认识这个产业，就会看见他们其实是走在一条没有人愿意走的险路上，为全世界种下一朵又一朵能开出奇迹的花。建造一座晶圆半导体工厂，耗费的不只是看得见、算得出的时间与金钱，更多的是你看不见。集合无数人的心力与大自然的资源，才能淬炼出那一小片让人赞叹的晶片。而且，如果不是因为时间的因素，早年新建一座晶圆半导体工厂不仅非常昂贵，毛利率还低得让人心酸。所以，生产晶圆半导体在过去是没有人想做的工作。要不是科技不断进步，半导体产业不断力求精简化，台积电不断追求更好的商业生产模式，今天你不会看见台积电创下的获利奇迹。
Semiconductors are distinguished by 2 major business models, fabless and foundry. Fabless companies, such as NVIDIA, AMD, and Qualcomm, focus mainly on the design aspect of semiconductor chips and do not own manufacturing facilities. Instead, they rely on foundries to produce their designs. Foundries, on the other hand, are the facilities that bring chip designs to life. Companies like TSMC and Samsung own and operate these manufacturing plants, turning silicon wafers into functional semiconductor chips. Intel, a dominant player in the early 2000s, uniquely positioned itself by incorporating both fabless design and foundry capabilities, controlling the entire process from design to production. This integration allowed Intel to maintain a strong hold on the market until the rise of dedicated foundries.
Global semiconductor sales totaled $439 billion in 2020, and that's an increase of 6.5% compared to the 2019 total of $412.3 billion, according to the Semiconductor Industry Association. Global sales for the month of December 2020 were $39.2 billion, an increase of 8.3% compared to the December 2019 total. Another big reason for the shortage? Cars are getting more advanced, and they need more semiconductors. In fact, right now, it's the auto industry that's feeling the squeeze in computer chips most acutely. Cars not only need advanced chips to run increasingly complicated in-vehicle computer systems, they also need older, less advanced semiconductors for things like power steering.
Been a really whiplashy 90 minutes for TSMC in terms of putting out their numbers and then giving us guidance. So top line did really well, it beat estimates. The bottom line was beating estimates. The top line was in line, so they managed to squeeze out extra profit through cost controls. But then they gave the outlook. They said that this year their revenue and the industry revenue will be worse than expected. In fact, TSMC sees the first half of this year dropping 10%, rebounding in the second half and actually seeing a decline in revenue for the full year. That would be the first time, by my calculations, the first time since 2009, so the financial crisis, that they had a year-on-year fall in revenue. What's interesting, the big surprise, is they did not cut their capex. Now, there's a lot of rumor and debate over the last week that they may cut their massive capex budget, 32 to 36 billion US dollars. They didn't. They're sticking with it. They are not flinching. The reason is that they still believe they're going to need that kind of capacity over the next few years. And more importantly, ChatGPT and all this excitement about AI is driving a lot of demand. The chips that they make at the leading edge are very, very important to the AI space, crunching all those numbers. And so they're really plowing ahead to make sure there is enough capacity, especially in the second half of this year, to ensure that enough chips will be coming off their factories that can go to NVIDIA and AMD and Intel and all the other companies that are moving into the AI space.
Their revenue hit a staggering $23.5 billion US. And get this, their gross margin for the quarter was a whopping 57.8%.
57.8%, wow. You know, when I hear gross margin, my eyes usually glaze over a little. But you're saying this is a big deal, even for someone like me who doesn't live and breathe finance.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Break it down for me.
Okay, so that 57.8% basically means that for every dollar TSMC makes in revenue, they get to keep 57.8 cents as pure profit after they've paid for the cost of actually making the chips.
Oh, okay.
So they're making a lot of money, right? But they're also getting better at it, more efficient.
Right.
And there are probably a few reasons for that, like selling more of those high-end chips we were talking about, improving their manufacturing processes, and maybe even having a bit more power to set prices since the demand is so high.
So they're kind of in the driver's seat right now, it sounds like. And speaking of holding all the cards, the report keeps mentioning TSMC's big focus on this 3nm and 5mm technology.
Right.
I know you touched on this earlier, but remind me again why those tiny little numbers are such a big deal in the world of chips.
It's all about transistors, really.
Okay.
So those numbers, the 3nm, the 5mm, they're talking about the size of the transistors on a chip. And when it comes to processors, smaller is better. We're talking nanometers here. A nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter. It's unbelievably small.
It's kind of hard to even imagine, honestly.
Yeah. And TSMC is leading the pack in producing these tiny but incredibly powerful chips. And like we were saying, those are essential for AI and really any other application that requires a ton of processing power.
Last week, we got a very encouraging earnings report from Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, a.k.a. Taiwan Semi, or just TSMC for short. The world's leading semiconductor manufacturer reported excellent numbers early last Thursday, which were strong enough to spark a strong rally for basically the entire sector. Yes, this stock is that important. While Taiwan Semi itself was only up 1.5%, by the end of last week, the company's commentary was so positive that the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index finished the week up 5.4%. There's a reason these stocks ran. Taiwan Semi delivered 39% revenue growth year over year, 57% earnings growth. These are extraordinary numbers. Neither of those were big surprises because the company releases monthly revenue results, so we had a very good idea of how much money they were really making. But you know what was a surprise? Taiwan Semi's guidance for the first quarter of 2025. In the first quarter, Taiwan Semi expects revenue of $25 to $25.8 billion, which would represent an increase of 33 to 37% year over year. And based on the company's exchange rate assumptions, they're expecting gross margin profit between 57 and 59%, up from 53% in the first quarter of last year. Now, AI, all these numbers, they were substantially ahead of expectations. That's what you need to know.
Now, its chips are powering something entirely different.
ChatGPT has started a very intense conversation.
He thinks it's the most revolutionary thing since the iPhone.
Venture capital interest in AI startups has skyrocketed.
All of us working in this field have been optimistic that at some point the broader world would understand the importance of this technology. And it's actually really exciting that that's starting to happen.
As the engine behind large language models like ChatGPT, NVIDIA is finally reaping rewards for its investment in AI, even as other chip giants suffer in the shadow of US-China trade tensions and an ease in the chip shortage that's weakened demand. But the California-based chip designer relies on Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company to make nearly all its chips.
There's been a few shifting pieces recently in the chip race as companies fight for a spot on the chip sector leaderboard. Taiwan Semiconductor reportedly considering running Intel's U.S. factories, according to Bloomberg. Intel shares pulling back from a jump earlier in the week where U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance highlighted the importance of U.S.-based chip makers. Here with the latest on what's ahead in the semiconductor landscape, Baird Technology Desk sector strategist Ted Mortensen. Ted, it's really great to have you here because we keep getting these headlines fast and furious today. The latest, a report that the administration has approached Taiwan Semiconductor about this stake, partnership, what have you, with Intel and Taiwan Semi to manufacture chips in the U.S. What do you make of that?
Well, Intel's somewhat of a sinking ship right now. They're having a lot of trouble on their 18A foundry node. They just cannot, along with Samsung, they're really having trouble at the 3nm range. Now, you take TSM, which is, I would say, the gold-plated area of manufactured at these advanced nodes. They're already manufacturing in volume at 3nm. They've cracked the code at that node, and they're really moving to 2nm, which is the magical node And the reason why they have such an advantage is that at 2 nanometers, you get about 15% better performance and about 30% better power profiles. And when you talk about Gen AI, you need to be there, and Intel's not. So in some respects, the administration's move here is not unexpected.
半导体在日常生活里的应用不是这几年才开始的事，而台积电自1987年开始专营晶圆半导体代工厂的业务以来，辗转也超过38个年头，从没有人要做的工作，一路做到成为全世界都抢着要合作的公司。台积电耗费的时间与金钱成本，还有台湾这块土地为生产半导体所做的牺牲，不是普通人可以想象的。当世界以国家安全为理由，以经济发展为目标，要求台湾跟台积电共同努力时，我们当然非常乐意和各国一起打拼。只是在大家都着眼金光闪闪、很是赚钱的晶圆半导体事业时，不要看清这个比指甲还小的晶片事业，因为从晶圆半导体的生产历史来看，这个事业从来都是一场跟时间赛跑的金钱游戏，没有例外，没有捷径，只有坚持才有机会收获。